Mr. Speaker, yesterday I brought forward my concerns about the actions of the Children's Advocate in making negative comments about the Phoenix Sinclair inquiry. In question period, I asked for the resignation of Darlene MacDonald, Manitoba's Children's Advocate. The Free Press has said that Ms. MacDonald is off base. Dan Lett, a former child executive, wrote the following: a former chief executive officer of Winnipeg Child and Family Services, MacDonald seems to have lost touch with the duties of the Children's Advocate. She doesn't represent the Child and Family Services system, nor is it her job to advocate for social workers. I ask the Premier today, will he be asking for the resignation of the Children's Advocate?
Mr. Speaker, the member knows full well that the Children's Advocate is not accountable directly to the government. It's a person selected by all members of the legislature and approved by all members of the legislature, including the member from River Heights, and that her role is to act independent from government, to give her views on matters that are before her, including child welfare issues, obviously, which is a central focus of her activity. And so, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, I won't be asking for a resignation because that is a matter for the entire legislature to consider. But members of the legislature, independent officers of the legislature, have the right to make their comments, and then they are in the public arena and can be properly debated in terms of the appropriateness of those comments and whether they move the agenda forward for making life in Manitoba safer for children.
Mr. Speaker, as Dan Lett wrote in her comments about the excesses of this inquiry, MacDonald expressed no concerns about the actions of unions in repeatedly delaying testimony. Her failure to mention that would suggest she is once again losing sight of her duties in this matter. Dan Lett continued, MacDonald needs to remember she is not a union steward, a child welfare agency CEO, or a lawyer. She is the last line of defense for vulnerable children. Given the Children's Advocate Darlene MacDonald's statement about the wasteful Phoenix Sinclair inquiry and her inadequate clarification yesterday, I ask the Premier, will he support the effort to have Ms. MacDonald resign?
We support the Phoenix Sinclair inquiry. The Children's Advocate, in the statements that were reported publicly, went on the record and said, I quote, the public has a right to know what went on in this situation. She has made that clear in her statements that are reported in the newspaper of record in this town. And the reality is that this person is an independent officer of the legislation. The inquiry has much serious work to do to understand what happened in this situation, to protect children in the future. The Children's Advocate has already acknowledged that.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is that the Children's Advocate, Darlene MacDonald, when she provided the clarification, she failed to apologize for the inappropriateness of her comment. And indeed, she rather just provided a restatement of the questions that she had raised about the Sinclair inquiry. Since the Children's Advocate has not even fully recognized the inappropriateness of her comments and hasn't issued a complete retraction or apology, it's hard to believe that the Premier is standing up for her continuing to be the Children's Advocate. I ask the Premier, will he now support Darlene MacDonald's resignation?
We support the inquiry. The Children's Advocate supports the inquiry. This matter needs to proceed, and it will, according to what the Commissioner thinks is appropriate in terms of readiness to move on that. The Children's Advocate is accountable to the legislature, can come to standing committee of the legislature. What's important is that we get on with the inquiry, that all the information be put in front of the Commissioner, that all the parties have a chance to make their comments, all the parties have a chance to be represented as appropriate, and that the conclusions of the inquiry give us further guidance on how we can make life safe for children in Manitoba that are in care of child welfare authorities. That is the objective here, is to ensure that any child that comes into care in a child welfare authority is as safe as possible, and that's the purpose of the inquiry. I think we best get on with the inquiry, Mr. Speaker.